Alright, it seems like day by day, Ilia Topuria is becoming bigger and bigger of a star. I mean, we just saw the other day, he walked down in this massive stadium in Spain and got a huge pop from the fans. And it seems like we're moving closer and closer to Ilia Topuria headlining a Spain card main event, defending his featherweight title. But who is that going to be against? Because last weekend we had a massive featherweight co-main event with massive title implications. And we've been talking about for the past week, I mean, who is Ilia Topuria going to fight? And I said, look guys, there could be somebody that, you know, performs really well. And all of a sudden, fans are talking about this matchup. And while I think it would have been better if Yair had won, Brian Ortega is still super dangerous and is someone that you can't sleep on. In this video, I'm going to break down the co-main event to the fight and talk about what title implications can we take away from that. Is Brian Ortega going to fight Ilia Topuria next? Should it be someone else? And I'm also going to talk about how I think the matchup between Brian Ortega and Ilia Topuria goes. And at the end of the video, I'm going to be giving some of my thoughts, just a little bit about Brandon Moreno and Brandon Royval, since that was the main event. Brandon Royval got a split decision win over Brandon Moreno. Shouldn't have been split decision, but we're going to get into all that and more. But first, I want to remind you guys that the subscribe button, like, comment, and share. We're almost at 12k subs, guys. All you guys need to do is just hit the subscribe button, help support. We're almost there. Just comment in the comment section below, because that also helps share the video. And make sure to click the link in the description to join my new Discord server. We're always having conversation there, and we're always going to give some sneak peeks on upcoming videos coming up. So make sure to click the link in the description for updates and all of that. But let's get into it, alright? You know, UFC fight nights have been dry for a while. We've been at the Apex, finally out of the Apex in an open crowd, a brand new location. I know it's surprising to hear. And yeah, this card was fun. I mean, we had a main event and a co-main event that were both 5 rounds, and they both were massive fights. They both honestly could have been headliners on their own, if we're going to be honest. And yeah, Yair Rodriguez was the guy going into this fight. I think was a favorite, right? I had picked him to win. I made a video last week talking about a potential matchup between him and Ilia Topuria because I was pretty confident that he was going to win. I mean, also there was a lot of beef between Yair and Ilia Topuria, so I thought it made all the sense in the world as long as he won the fight. But as we know, Brian Ortega defeats Yair Rodriguez by 3rd round submission, making him tied for the 2nd most submissions in UFC featherweight history. But I got a question for you guys. Who is number 1? Who has the most submissions in UFC featherweight history? Let me know in the comment section below, and by the end of the video, I'm going to answer that question for you guys here. But let's get into it, alright? Both these guys are in the Octagon. Bruce Buffer is introducing their names, and all of a sudden, we see Brian Ortega take a massive stumble. What had happened? I mean, right away, I was like, what is going on when the broadcasters were, you know, talking about him stumbling? It turns out that he had potentially rolled his ankle while jumping and preparing, you know, as Bruce Buffer was calling his name. I mean, I can only imagine the thoughts going through Brian Ortega's mind. I mean, you're coming off of a massive shoulder injury, right? And I know a lot of people like to take a shot on him for not fighting. At the end of the day, guys, you guys have to understand, he was dealing with a big injury. I mean, that shoulder injury, I mean, we've seen Yair Prochazka deal with that injury before. I mean, and he had it bad. And Brian Ortega, being a jiu-jitsu guy, is probably going to have a lot more injuries, right? We see these wrestler and jiu-jitsu types guys have a lot more injuries than, you know, typical strikers do. And that's because, you know, grappling is just a lot more harder on the body if you're doing it for a longer period of time. So yeah, honestly, it makes sense that he would get these kind of injuries, but he comes back from a massive injury just to roll his ankle before the fight even begins, as he's in the Octagon, in front of everybody, in front of Yair Rodriguez, in front of the broadcast. I mean, I think there's probably a lot going through his mind in that moment. I'm surprised he was even able to perform, because as soon as the fight started, I mean, you could tell he was a little bit unsure of himself, a little bit nervous, you know, he wasn't exactly super aggressive, and just, you know, Yair Rodriguez was lighting him up. I mean, I thought Yair was going to finish him in the 1st round. I think a lot of people are saying Yair might have fumbled that win. I mean, Brian Ortega at the end of the day is tough. I mean, the guy went 5 rounds of Volkanovski, got battered in that fight. I mean, he did lose to Max Holloway, didn't get knocked out. It was a TKO, doctor stoppage kind of thing. But Brian Ortega has been known to take a lot of damage and keep coming forward. That's just his style, get it to the mat and submit you. And that's what we've seen in the past, and that's what we saw in this fight, because he had took a lot of damage in that 1st round, arguably a 10-8, but then Brian Ortega comes back in that 2nd round, game face on, recovers, and arguably gets a 10-8 of his own against Yair Rodriguez. I mean, one of the judges scored both rounds a 10-8 for each other. And then we get to the 3rd round, and we see Brian Ortega beautifully set up an arm triangle. Yair Rodriguez is forced to put his elbow up to defend himself against some of those shots, some of the elbows, and Brian Ortega takes his opportunity as soon as possible to snatch up his arm and snatch up his head and get the choke, and he's squeezing, and yeah, he gets it right away because this guy is so good at jiu-jitsu, and he is able to win the fight. And Brian Ortega is able to win the fight, a massive win. This is the win he needed. There's a new featherweight champion. My suspicion is that Ilia Topuria is probably going to be looking for someone, you know, around that September mark. Maybe they headline that September card, since they announced that UFC 306 will be at the Sphere for Independence Day in Mexico. So what I'm trying to say is, if I'm Brian Ortega, I'm taking this opportunity. But we don't know how badly he hurt his foot. Maybe the guy's going to be out again for a while. And Brian Ortega comes back in a big way. And I think a lot of people have realized, look, maybe we were too harsh on him. Like I said, you can't blame the guy. He was injured badly. It's not like the guy was just sitting out waiting for title shots. I mean, we've seen guys like that, like Colby Covington, have sit out for so long just for a title shot and do absolutely nothing with the opportunity. Yeah, I'm still mad about Colby. Brian Ortega isn't like that. I mean, we've seen the guy put put his all in these performances, not give up, even in his losses with Volkanovski and Holloway. So I think you got to give the guy some credit. I've always said that I think he's the most hated UFC fighter for no reason. But it brings us to Ilia Topuria, because as much as I could say, wow, I like Brian Ortega, that is a bad matchup for Brian Ortega, if we're going to be honest. I mean, we've seen Brian Ortega, at the end of the day, get hit a lot. That is his weakness. I mean, the guy's defense is not really all there. I don't think his striking is bad. I actually think his striking is rather underrated. I think it's his defense that is the biggest problem. The guy doesn't move his head at all. He plops forward, and he's just there to get hit. I feel like if someone just teed off on him, kind of like Arnold Allen did against Dan Hooker, I feel like he would lose. I wouldn't mind seeing if they're not going to give Brian Ortega a title shot, maybe give him the Mosvar Evolov. I think that would be a fun fight. I mean, Mosvar is a grappler. We've seen him almost get submitted by Diego Lopez. So if Diego Lopez is almost able to submit him, I would suspect that Brian Ortega could get pretty damn close himself. But if they give Brian Ortega the title shot, I think this would be a kind of a big mistake. But at the same time, who else are you going to give a title shot to? Only because, yeah, that's a bad matchup. Topuria hits very hard. I mean, he hits harder than Volkanovski, I think, and he hits harder than Max Holloway, I also think. And we've seen how they were able to piece up Brian Ortega. I think you would finish Brian Ortega within 2 rounds. Another thing is, with Brian Ortega and Ilia Topuria, if you go to the ground, Ilia Topuria isn't going to be some lost puppy on the ground. No, the guy has some serious jiu-jitsu himself. That's how he started his career. So I trust that Ilia Topuria will be able to get out of those submission attempts at least and keep it on the feet and just batter him and knock him out within the first 2 rounds. I wouldn't even be surprised if it was the first round. Unless Brian Ortega makes some serious changes and makes some serious work on his defense. That's what he needs to do in this time, I think. He might think, hey, I could just thug it out, but even if he's able to, you know, take those shots on the chin, at some point in his career, his chin is going to crack, right? And it's only a matter of time. You're just really taking so much damage for no reason. Like, someone could have a 10-year career, right? But because of taking all the shots, I mean, it could be cut in half, a 5-year career. I mean, we could see Brian Ortega get knocked out within his next few fights because of all this damage. Now, before I talk about the main event between Brandon Moreno and Brandon Royval, I want to add on to the question I added earlier, right? I asked you guys, who has the most submissions in the UFC featherweight division? I'm going to add on a little bit because I want you guys to try to also guess what is that number. I'll give you a hint. It's number between 1 and 7. But anyway, the main event, I mean, let's talk about it. I mean, it wasn't the most exciting fight, right? I felt like both guys were a little bit off, and I felt like the output was overall pretty slow. But I felt like Brandon Royval, if he was going to win this fight and needed a title shot after this, he was going to need a big finish. He was going to need a big performance. And I just don't think that this performance was it, because Alexandre Pantoja has now beaten Brandon Royval twice and beat him in December. That was his last fight. I mean, if they do this in May, and especially if that winds up being the main event, a trilogy fight between Pantoja and Royval, I think that would just be ridiculous. I don't want to see that fight. It seemed like Pantoja really dominated him in the last fight, and it wasn't even an exciting fight. Like, I was really anticipated for that fight. I thought it'd be a fun fireworks type of fight. It really wasn't. And, you know, we saw early on Brandon Moreno do very good, right? I thought the first round arguably could have gone to Royval. I was surprised to see so many people give it to Moreno, but it was still a very close round. I don't know who I would give it to. I thought Royval had a lot of good moments, and I just thought overall that I felt like Moreno was just trying to find that one big shot. It was very unlike him, man. Maybe he was injured, but it was just a weird way he was fighting. I felt like he was just trying to find one big shot, and that was that. And Brandon Royval did the right thing, and what he did was, you know, he was setting up his jab, having high volume, not really relying on that power, and tapping the guard. And while people are making fun of it, it was more than what Brandon Moreno did, and that's what got him the win. Was it the most impressive win? Absolutely not, but you're doing more than Brandon Moreno, and that's why he got the decision win, especially in that 5th round. I thought that was clearly for Royval. And for some judge to give 4 rounds to Brandon Moreno, I mean, yeah, I get it. We're in Mexico. I get we're going to try to give it to the Mexican guy and appease the fans, but some of the scorecards were atrocious. Like, this was really one of the worst judging fight nights I've ever seen. I mean, seriously, I forgot there was another fight on the card that I was like, what fight are you watching? Oh, it was the fight with Felipe Dos Santos. That was absolutely insane, that scoring too. That was a split decision that should not have gone to a split decision. But to answer the question, who has the most submissions in UFC featherweight history, it goes to my man Charles Oliveira with 6 submissions. Brian Ortega is the second, as I said before. But with 3 more submissions, Brian Ortega could very well take that record, and seeing where he is right now, I could see it being a possibility. But guys, if you guys missed my other videos talking about Alexander Volkanovski and if he should fight Ilia Topuria next, and Ilia Topuria's superstardom, go click that video. I also talked about UFC 300 and how the main event is kind of disappointing and why some fans are disappointed and why I think they went wrong. Go click the videos on the screen, guys. Thank you guys for watching. You guys are the best fan base in MMA, and I'll see you guys in the next one.